The wind cut through the city streets like broken glass. It was the kind of night where people buried their faces into thick scarves and hurried along, desperate to escape the biting cold. Yet in the middle of it all, on a wooden park bench coated with frost, sat Emma. Her coat was thin, hardly more than a whisper against the winter air. The fabric clung to her frame, worn at the edges, unable to keep out the chill. She pulled it tighter around herself, though it made little difference. Her breath hung in the air like smoke, disappearing as quickly as it came, just like the life she once knew. Around her, the city was alive. Bright neon lights painted the sidewalks, couples laughed as they rushed toward warm restaurants, and children tugged their parents eagerly toward glowing shop windows. The world kept moving, fast, loud, and unaware. And in that rush, Emma sat still, unnoticed, as though she were just another shadow in the night. She hadn't always been this invisible. Once, she had a home filled with warmth, where her mother's voice drifted softly through the rooms. Once, she had dreams, simple ones, like traveling to the coast, painting sunsets, maybe building a life of her own. But dreams had a way of becoming fragile when reality pressed too hard. When her mother became ill, Emma devoted herself completely to her care. Day after day, night after night, she stayed by her bedside, feeding her, holding her hand, whispering comfort into the darkness. For years, Emma gave everything, her time, her strength, her youth. She didn't resent it. In fact, she counted it as love's greatest act, to be there until the very end. But when the end came, Emma found herself standing in a world that had no place for her anymore. With her mother gone, the little apartment they had shared was lost to debts and bills she couldn't pay. The friends she once leaned on had drifted away, busy with their own lives. And so, Emma drifted too. Out of her own story and into the background of everyone else's. Now, the bench was her companion. The cold was her constant. The ache inside her chest was heavier than any winter wind. She watched as people hurried past, bundled in layers, holding bags of gifts and food. No one met her eyes. No one noticed the way her hands trembled, or how she pressed them under her arms just to hold on to a shred of warmth. She was surrounded by movement, by laughter, by life, yet she felt utterly alone. For the first time in a long while, Emma allowed herself to wonder, is this all that's left of me? The thought was sharp, painful, and she closed her eyes against it. On that freezing evening, the city glowed with life, but for Emma, the world had dimmed. All she had was silence, cold, and an ache too heavy to carry. Emma's fingers had gone numb. She tried to rub them together, but they felt stiff and unresponsive, as though they no longer belonged to her. The cold had a way of stealing little pieces of her, bit by bit, until she wondered how much more she could lose before there was nothing left. She pulled her coat tighter and lowered her head. The park's fountain, drained and frozen, stood like a monument to endings, and Emma couldn't help but see herself reflected in its emptiness. The streets nearby hummed with activity. Office workers spilled out of buildings, eager to get home. Families carried shopping bags brimming with food for dinner, gifts wrapped in glossy paper, and steaming cups of cocoa. Their cheeks were red from the cold, but their eyes were bright. They moved quickly, their lives overflowing with purpose. Emma sat still among them, an unmoving figure in the blur of motion. It was as if she existed on a different plane, present, yet unseen. A man brushed past her, muttering into his phone about a deal he was closing. He didn't glance her way. A woman, elegant in a long wool coat, hurried by carrying a bouquet of flowers, her heels clacking on the pavement. She didn't notice the girl hunched just a few feet away. Even a group of teenagers laughing loudly and tossing snowballs around her seemed not to see her at all. One snowball landed near Emma's feet, scattering ice against her shoes, but they didn't even acknowledge it. She had never felt so transparent, as though she were fading into the night. Emma thought of how often she used to walk these same streets, back when her life was full. She remembered evenings when she and her mother would stop by a bakery on their way home, sharing a slice of pie and laughing about something small. Back then, the city seemed warm, alive, welcoming. Now, it was a place of doors closed to her, windows she could only look through, and strangers' faces that blurred together because none of them looked back. She swallowed hard. Maybe I don't belong anywhere anymore, she thought. The words stung, because they felt true. What place did she have in a world that hurried past suffering without pausing? What story did she have to tell, now that hers had unraveled into loss and silence? A sharp wind blew, carrying laughter from across the street. Emma turned her head and saw a family decorating a tree in the window of their home, golden lights flickering. For a brief moment, warmth glowed inside her at the memory of holidays with her mother. But the warmth faded quickly, replaced by a hollow ache. She bowed her head again, pressing her hands under her arms to keep what little warmth she had left. Around her, life went on, a river rushing past. She was a stone in its path, unmoved, unnoticed, invisible. And invisibility, she realized, was colder than the winter air. Emma sat with her eyes lowered, drifting between the present and the memories she could not silence. The sounds of the city blurred together, horns, chatter, laughter, the crunch of boots on snow. None of it touched her. She was wrapped in her own silence, as though the cold had built a wall around her. But then, something small broke through. "Mom," a young voice piped up, clear and insistent. "Why is she sitting there?" Emma lifted her head, startled. A boy no older than 7 was standing just a few steps away, his mittened hand tugging at his mother's sleeve. He had big brown eyes that seemed to hold the kind of honesty only children carried. His breath puffed in the air as he stared directly at her, really saw her, in a way no one else had all evening. His mother glanced at Emma briefly, then tried to usher him along. "Come on, it's cold. We'll be late." Her voice was brisk, her pace hurried, her focus elsewhere. But the boy resisted, planting his boots firmly against the ground. "But, Mom," he said, louder this time, "she's shivering. Can't we help her?" The words hung in the air like a bell, sharp and impossible to ignore. People passing by turned their heads, curious for a moment, before returning to their own rush. But Emma sat frozen, not from the cold this time, but from shock. It had been so long since someone had spoken about her with concern, so long since she had been acknowledged at all. Her throat tightened. She wanted to smile, to reassure the boy, to tell him she was fine. But the truth caught in her chest. She wasn't fine. And for once, she couldn't pretend. The boy pulled away from his mother's grip and walked closer to the bench. His boots crunched softly in the snow. Emma blinked at him, unsure if she should speak, unsure if she even remembered how. He stopped right in front of her, close enough that she could see the earnest determination on his little face. Carefully, he slipped off his bright red mittens. Slightly frayed at the edges, but thick and warm, and held them out to her. "These are mine," he whispered, almost shyly. "But you need them more." Emma stared at the small hands extended toward her. The mittens looked so out of place against her bare, trembling fingers. For a long moment, she didn't move. Her heart swelled and ached all at once, as if it didn't know how to hold the sudden warmth pressing into it. Finally, with trembling hands, she accepted them. The wool was soft against her skin, already warmer than anything she had felt in days. Her vision blurred, tears welling in her eyes. She hadn't cried in so long, it had felt useless before. But now, the tears came, unbidden and unstoppable. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. The boy smiled, simple and pure, before his mother hurried forward, still flustered, yet now unable to ignore Emma's presence. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Emma wasn't invisible. Someone had seen her. Someone had cared. Emma held the red mittens in her hands as if they were made of glass. They were simple, knitted, a little stretched at the cuffs, worn at the fingertips, but to her, they might as well have been treasure. She slipped them on slowly, almost reverently. The warmth seeped into her frozen fingers, stinging at first, then settling into a steady, gentle comfort. Her tears fell silently. She hadn't expected kindness, not here, not anymore. For so long, she had been passed over like a shadow, seen but not noticed, present but not acknowledged. And now, from the unlikeliest source, came this offering. The boy's mother finally caught up to him, her face flustered, her breath visible in sharp bursts. She knelt down beside Emma, her eyes filled with apology. "I'm so sorry," she began, glancing between Emma and her son. He's very persistent. I didn't want to intrude." Emma shook her head quickly. Words failed her, but her eyes said what her voice could not: this is not intrusion. This is grace. The boy beamed, proud of what he had done. His small act carried the weight of something far greater than he could understand. Children had a way of cutting straight through the noise of the world, through the hesitations and excuses adults built up around themselves. He saw her, he helped, and it was that simple. Emma whispered again, her voice catching, "Thank you, both of you." The mother hesitated, looking down at Emma's thin coat, the way it clung to her frame against the wind. Slowly, almost reluctantly, she began unwinding the scarf from around her own neck. It was long, thick, soft, still warm from her body. Without a word, she draped it gently around Emma's shoulders. Emma's breath caught. The wool hugged her neck, blocking the sting of the icy air. It wasn't just warmth, it was the feeling of being cared for, of being remembered as human. The woman gave her a small, tentative smile. "Take it," she said softly. "We'll be fine. You need it more." Emma clutched the scarf, pressing it to her face as tears streamed freely now. The mittens, the scarf, two simple things, yet they were worth more than gold in that moment. The boy leaned close, whispering like he was sharing a secret. "See? You look warmer already." Emma laughed, shaky and fragile, but real. She hadn't heard her own laughter in what felt like forever. It startled her, then soothed her, like remembering a song she thought she'd forgotten. Around them, people were beginning to notice. A man paused on the sidewalk, watching quietly. A young woman slowed her steps, her brow furrowed. For the first time, Emma wasn't just an invisible figure on a bench. She was someone seen, someone acknowledged, someone worthy of compassion. And it all began with one small gift, offered by a child's hand. The scarf settled warmly against Emma's neck, and for the first time in weeks, maybe months, she felt something other than despair. She felt seen. The boy's innocent courage and his mother's hesitant kindness had cracked open the wall the world had built around her. And that small opening was all it took for light to pour in. A man passing by slowed his steps. He had been on his way home, carrying a paper bag that smelled faintly of coffee and fresh bread. He watched as Emma pressed the red mittens to her chest and adjusted the scarf around her shoulders. Something stirred inside him, a reminder of his own sister, who had once struggled after losing her job. Without overthinking, he stepped forward. "Here," he said gently, offering the steaming cup from his bag. "It's still hot. It'll help." Emma looked up, startled. She hesitated, then accepted the cup with trembling hands. The heat seeped through the mittens, sending a warmth through her body that went deeper than skin. Her voice shook as she whispered, "Thank you." The man only nodded, but his eyes softened, and he lingered a moment longer before moving on. Just then, a young woman approached. She had stopped earlier when the boy first spoke, but now she dug through her tote bag with purpose. Pulling out a folded blanket she had just purchased as a gift, she knelt down and wrapped it carefully around Emma's shoulders. "I was going to give this to someone else," she said softly, "but I think you need it more tonight." Emma clutched the blanket, overwhelmed. The tears came freely now, unstoppable. She couldn't remember the last time people had looked at her, not with pity, but with care. More people began to notice. A man in a heavy parka paused long enough to slip a few bills into Emma's coat pocket without a word. Another woman crouched down, pressing a granola bar into her hand. A teenager offered the knit cap from his head before jogging off to catch up with his friends. It was as if the boy's small act had unlocked something hidden in everyone else, a reminder that kindness wasn't meant to be saved for grand gestures, but offered in moments exactly like this. One spark had lit another, and another, until a quiet circle of compassion surrounded Emma on that lonely bench. The boy, still standing proudly beside her, smiled as if this was exactly how the world was supposed to work. "See, Mom," he whispered, his voice full of certainty. "She's not cold anymore." Emma let out a broken laugh, hugging the blanket close, scarf wrapped tight, hands cradling the warm cup. The cold was still there, it always would be, but it no longer felt unbearable. Not when she was wrapped in the proof that she wasn't alone. For the first time in a long while, the world wasn't rushing past her. The world had stopped, noticed, and chosen kindness. And in that moment, Emma felt the weight of her sorrow begin to lift. The night air was still sharp, but Emma no longer felt swallowed by it. Wrapped in a stranger's blanket, a scarf snug around her neck, her hands shielded by a child's mittens, and a warm cup cradled between them, she felt something she hadn't dared to hope for in a long time. She felt human again. The small crowd that had gathered began to drift away, each person returning to their evening, yet not before offering Emma a smile, a word of encouragement, or a touch on the shoulder. They left her with more than food and warmth, they left her with dignity. The boy lingered longest, his mittenless hands tucked into his pockets now. He looked at Emma with a simple, satisfied grin, as though giving away what was his had been the most natural thing in the world. Emma met his gaze, her lips trembling into a smile of her own. "You reminded me I still matter," she whispered, her voice catching. The boy tilted his head, not fully grasping the weight of her words, but sensing the truth of them all the same. His mother gently placed her hand on his shoulder, pride shining in her tired eyes. Then, with a final nod to Emma, they turned and walked into the night, their footsteps fading into the hum of the city. Emma sat for a while longer, watching the glow of streetlights reflect off the snow. Her body was still weary, her circumstances unchanged, but her spirit had been rekindled. Where there had been only emptiness, there was now a quiet fire, sparked by kindness she had not expected and would never forget. She thought of her mother. How often her mother had told her, even in illness, "The world can be cruel, Emma. But it can also be beautiful. Look for the beauty, it will find you." For months, Emma had believed those words had died with her. Tonight, she realized they were still alive, living in the hands of strangers, in the courage of a child, in the warmth of shared humanity. She lifted her gaze to the city around her. It didn't feel as distant anymore. Every window with its golden light, every passerby with their hurried stride, seemed connected to her in some invisible way. She was not forgotten. She was not invisible. As the night deepened, Emma rose from the bench. She wasn't sure where she would go or what tomorrow would hold. But for the first time in what felt like forever, she stepped forward not with despair, but with hope. Because she knew now that even in the coldest winters, kindness could be a fire strong enough to save a soul. And sometimes, all it took was one small spark, offered with open hands, to remind the world to see.